72 confirmed aggregate cases since the beginning of the pandemic of coronavirus in Victoria. That is just 35 new cases since yesterday. Sadly, there are now 729 deaths due to coronavirus in Victoria, an increase of 6. One death has been removed due to duplication. Those fatalities are one male in their 70s, one female and one male in their 80s, 3 males and one female in their 90s. We send our condolences and best wishes to each and every one of those families. All of those fatalities are linked to aged care outbreaks. There are 122 Victorians in hospital. 12 of those are in intensive care and 7 of those 12 are on a ventilator, so those numbers continue to fall, and that is great news. A total of 2,497,710 test results have been received since the beginning of the pandemic, which is an increase of 8,937 since yesterday. We're very grateful to each and every one of those people for coming forward and getting tested. These are essentially Saturday's numbers. Not great weather, obviously. These numbers are down a bit on each weekend anyway. But look, we would always want more and more people, the highest percentage possible of symptomatic Victorians to come forward and get tested. And what we don't want is a situation where test numbers are not an accurate measure of, not enough tests being done for us to have confidence that we've got a really clear picture of how much virus is out there. We don't want any steps in this safe and steady roadmap to be deferred or to be in any way compromised. So it really is important that each and every Victorian comes forward, gets tested. We still have confidence in that number, and the trend, as you saw, numbers steadily increased throughout last week as they do each week. But again, it's a powerful reminder and my personal request and a request on behalf of all Victorians to get to the other side of this. If you've got symptoms, however mild, please come forward as soon as you register those symptoms. That can be when you are most infectious. Don't put it off for a day or two. You'll get your results within 1 day. That's 90+% of results now back within 24 hours, and it means that we can care for you, and we can also make sure that in your choices and in the 14 days afterwards, you're not putting anybody else at risk, and that we're managing this as best we possibly can. There are 4,291 cases of unknown source, an increase of 6 since yesterday's report. There are 176 healthcare workers who are active cases. We send our best wishes to them. We thank them and, of course, all of their colleagues, those who are unwell, those who have been furloughed, and those who are working so hard in every setting, every hour of every shift. They are true heroes, and we are genuinely grateful to them. There are 1,075 active cases in Victoria. In terms of active cases in the regions, we're now down to 47 active cases in regional local government areas that are under the Stage 3 restrictions. There are no new cases in regional Victoria today. Colac has 23 active cases, Greater Geelong 6 active cases, Greater Bendigo 1 active case, and Ballarat no active cases. So that is a testament to the hard work and the absolute determination of regional Victorians to not only get these numbers low but to keep them low, and we're very grateful to every single person across regional Victoria for the part they are playing. Of course, regional Victoria took a step yesterday, as did metropolitan Melbourne. There's an opportunity for regional Victoria to take yet another step in just a few days' time if these trends continue. The Metro 14-day rolling average to 11 September is 54.4 cases. In regional Victoria, it has for the first time dipped below 4. It is now 3.9. That is a fantastic outcome. That's proof positive that this is not a theoretical exercise. It's a strategy that is working. And to see regional Victoria down to 3.9 cases, that means they are on the cusp of taking that next step. All things being equal, there's just a couple more days we need to get through, but we are very pleased to think that we'll be able to essentially take those big steps, but safe steps, towards opening regional Victoria up. Can I again just remind regional Victorians, the rules have changed. That's a good thing. That's a reflection of low numbers, but the rules still need to be followed. We'll have much more to say in coming days about individual plans for every single workplace. The Victoria Police efforts to make sure that the border between Melbourne and regional Victoria is as hard as it can possibly be, and also some other messaging around testing and some of the maintenance work that will need to be done to keep an accurate picture particularly as regional Victoria opens up, to deal with the inevitable cases, the inevitable outbreaks that will be a feature of many months to come. But having got the numbers low, then we are absolutely confident that we can keep the numbers low. That's where regional Victoria is at, and that is the trend in metropolitan Melbourne as well. Can I just make a couple of comments in relation to these last five weeks or so? We've gone from 725 cases to now we're down into the 30s. That is a mighty effort, and it's something that every Victorian, regardless of whether you're in the regions or in the suburbs or in the centre of Melbourne, everyone's playing their part. Everyone can be proud and pleased to see that the trend is with us. The numbers continue to come down. Particularly if you just spare a moment to think about what's happening in other parts of the world where the trend is most definitely not with them. The trend is working against them, and the trend is making lockdowns for a second, third time in some respects much more likely. There matters for those countries, for those parts of the world, but France with 10,000 cases in a day, Israel just announced no more than 500 metres from your home, so they've had many thousands of cases in recent days. That's a 3-week lockdown. Spain, the United Kingdom, the list goes on, where there are many parts of the world that are coming into winter, which will be a unique challenge, as we have experienced. What's more, their case numbers are at such a high level that they're in exactly the place that we don't want to be in as part of a third wave. We simply must do everything we can to avoid that, and staying the course, doing this in safe and steady steps, is the only way to avoid thousands and thousands of cases. My last look at this earlier this morning, I think France has got more than 2,000 people in hospital, close to 500 people on a machine to help them breathe, and their R0 number is nudging up towards 2. That means every infected person's infecting nearly 2 other people, so it won't be 10,000 cases a day for very long. Of course, no one's pleased about that. It's just it is an opportunity to reflect on the fact that this can get away from you very quickly, and that if you were to open up at a level that was higher than the experts tell us is safe, then you won't be open for very long. You will have driven numbers down, but you'll have no chance of keeping them low. That's what this strategy is. Open up and stay open. Get the numbers low and keep them low. That's exactly where regional Victoria finds itself, and it's exactly the trajectory and the pathway, the roadmap that metropolitan Melbourne is on as well. And that should give people great optimism and a sense of real purpose to see this through, to defeat this, to see it off, so that when we do open up in those safe and steady steps, we can stay open. That's the mission. That's what we want to do, and that's exactly what we will achieve by everybody working together. In terms of aged care, we have 513 active cases. Disability facility settings, we have 10 active cases, 6 in staff, 4 in residents. And that's probably about it from me in relation to the usual updates that we provide each day. Martin has joined us again to make some further announcements, another almost $290 million in important business support, whether it be for sole traders, those who have been worst affected by this pandemic, dedicated support for the City of Melbourne in a partnership with the Lord Mayor, and I want to give the Lord Mayor a shout out for the very productive and cooperative way in which we work together. The $100 million to support the city, given the unique burden that it carries, is a very important partnership, and one that will make a real difference, a real difference as we push through this and get to the other side of it. All of these announcements, of course, come on top of yesterday's announcements, $3 billion worth of business support. I just want to make a couple of comments on one element of this, and then I'll throw to Martin to speak in more detail about the elements of the package. But what we know, if you look at places like, say, New York, where they've been able to get their hospitality sector back to something approaching normal much faster than would otherwise have been the case, because they have used the footpath, curbside parking, they've taken some public space and turned it into pop-up cafes, restaurants, bars. That's exactly what we're going to do. We will change the way the city operates, and indeed the suburbs, and indeed regional cities. And we've got some images that we can share with you after the media conference about what that might look like, just to give you a sense of it. This this summer will be unlike any other, and I expect that by the end of the summer, so popular will these arrangements be, a mixture of some inside and many more people seated outside. I think that will become, in many respects, a lasting feature of the way the city and the suburbs, indeed the whole state, functions from a bar, restaurant, cafe, pub point of view. We know and understand there'll be some costs involved in that, and that's why there are dedicated grants, so that the cost of umbrellas and planter boxes and bollards and some of the other physical infrastructure that makes that possible, getting more people back into those businesses faster because they're outside, we don't want the cost to be a barrier to already strapped and businesses that are under considerable pressure being able to make that transition. Can I just say finally before I throw to Martin, we're very pleased with the response from local government. Many local councils, we've been talking with them, and they're very keen to make this happen. But I just say to local government across the board, we are happy to support you to expedite the planning arrangements here, but there does need to be some urgency with this. We don't want bureaucratic delays. We don't want arguments and debates. We want to get as many people seated in as quick a time as possible, utilising public space that has never been on offer previously, because that's unprecedented, because this challenge is absolutely unprecedented. But I'm very encouraged by the response of local government to this point. We've all got to get on and get this job done. Having said that, I might just leave Martin now to take you through the details of that nearly close to $300 million of additional support.
Thank you, Premier. Good to be here again, 2 days in a row. It's amazing. Yesterday, we announced our largest ever support for business in Victoria. We're continuing that today with a number of initiatives, as the Premier's indicated. The first of those I want to go to is $100 million of support for sole traders, for those hardest hit by restrictions. So that will apply to those sole traders who are tenants or licensees in a commercial premises or location and who will be closed, heavily restricted or restricted under the second step. They will be grants of $3,000. We think that will support around 33,000 sole traders across the state. So that will be those traders who work in areas like accommodation and tourism, some non-permitted retail, media and film production, gyms, creative studios, outdoor entertainment, private museums and galleries. So there'll be a whole range of sole traders who will be supported under that initiative. As I think many people are aware, primary income support for sole traders has been provided by the Commonwealth and through JobKeeper. We've been focusing our efforts primarily on those businesses which employ people, but the two levels of government have provided complementary support. This new sole trader initiative is a recognition of the serious challenges that many sole traders have faced. It will allow tens of thousands of them to help pay their overheads, to give them the opportunity to emerge on the other side and recover strongly. We have been supporting sole traders through a range of other initiatives already, including the Commercial Tenancy Relief Scheme, the support program for regional tourism accommodation providers, the Sustaining Creative Workers Fund, which Minister Foley announced, and some of the other supports like Upskill My Business, mentors and mental health support, and indeed the digital vouchers that we announced yesterday. There's also a $100 million Melbourne City Recovery Fund that will provide grants to businesses to move their activities outdoor, to fund COVID-safe events and indeed new infrastructure as we head into the warmer months and as people are welcomed back into the CBD. That's a partnership with the City of Melbourne, and I would just like to add my thanks to those of the Premier to the Lord Mayor. She's been a great partner in this, and it's wonderful to be able to collaborate with the City of Melbourne on this initiative. It will support something like 16,500 businesses which are registered in the City of Melbourne. Those businesses support north of 470,000 jobs, so it's an incredibly important part of our economy, and a lot of those businesses have been enormously impacted by the restrictions which have been required to combat this global pandemic. So of that $100 million, $30 million will be provided in grants to small and medium businesses to help pay for tables, plastic screens, umbrellas and all of the apparatus needed for outdoor hospitality, to reconfigure spaces, to convert areas like rooftops and courtyards for outdoor use. And we will be consulting along with Council with CBD businesses to finalise the details of that grants program over the coming days and weeks. There'll be another $30 million to support COVID-safe events and cultural activities in the CBD to attract visitors back to the city once it's safe to do so, and once the city is out of restrictions in obviously a much greater way than it is now. And there will be another $40 million going towards providing physical improvements to the CBD streetscape, whether that's about bike lanes, wider footpaths, bollards and the like. So as the Premier's indicated, this will, I think, utterly transform the city, and I think not just for this summer. It's going to be something that I think Victorians will love and appreciate, and will create a new, I think, alfresco environment for CBD dining, which will be, I suspect, enjoyed for many summers hence. Outside the CBD, there is an $87.5 million outdoor hospitality support package as well, and that will drive innovation and creativity in the way we model our hospitality offerings. So $58 million of that will be paid in grants of up to $5,000 to businesses to help pay for, again, umbrellas, furniture, screens, etc., but also to invest in training and to invest in advertising and the like. Those grants will be available to both licensed and unlicensed businesses, restaurants, takeaway food businesses, pubs, bars and clubs with a payroll under $3 million, and we estimate about 11,000 businesses outside the CBD will benefit from that. And another $30 million will go to local councils to help them implement the streamlined permit enforcement and monitoring processes that will be necessary to make this work and to support expanded outdoor hospitality. So those grants will be up to $500,000 for metropolitan councils and those councils which cover regional cities, and rural councils will be eligible for grants of up to $250,000. And some of that money can be passed on to businesses in the form of reducing or waiving permit fees, but they can also be invested in infrastructure like streetscaping. So that is some detail of the package. I'm sure there'll be a lot of detail that's sought. We'll be able to provide you with that information either during this briefing if possible, otherwise we'll provide it to you afterwards. And with those words, I will hand you back to the Premier.
Thank you, Martin. We're happy to take any questions you have.
Outdoor dining, will you be looking at removing cars from roads or car parks from roads, not just in the CBD, but places like City of Yarra, City of Stonington?
Yeah, I think that obviously each site will be judged on its merits. So what we can see, just to give you a couple of examples, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to see more and more tables on footpaths. Some of that foot traffic may move to the curbside parking area, where curbside parking would no longer be allowed. We may see some streets closed, some laneways closed. We may see some public space, so parks and gardens that are adjacent to significant numbers of restaurants and pubs, venues like that, that may well be transformed. Not necessarily every square inch, but a portion of it may be transformed, and it may be a shared area between a number of different businesses. And of course, because this will run all summer, and because I think that these changes will be so popular that they ought to be a feature of every summer, some of the investments that will be made to fit those spaces out, there'll be a significant return on that investment, not just in the months ahead, but indeed in the years ahead. So every space obviously is unique, and we'll need to make sure that we have that local input. That's why councils are a partner in this. But again, we expect those decisions to be made in a timely way, and all our feedback to this point is that they will be.
Is that work happening now? Do you have councils out looking at footpaths, looking at spaces?
We are well engaged with both the City of Melbourne. They've got a bit more time, obviously, metro councils, but regional Victoria, this will be, again, all things being equal, if we take this next step in the next few days, then this can be a feature of regional pubs, restaurants, cafes very, very soon. We've got to get it right though, and there'll be some further advice, further details about exactly how far apart tables need to be, some of the perspex screens between tables, things that have been a feature of what other cities have done, other cities that have been able to get their hospitality sector as close to normal as possible without necessarily seeing those settings drive additional coronavirus cases. So there's a bit to be worked through, but I think the most important part about today is not only a partnership with local government to get these rules changed very quickly, but also giving venues a cash grant to help pay for the things they need to make it possible. We don't want the cost of this when many businesses are cash strapped as it is. They've got very significant challenges. We don't want that to be in any way a limiting factor.
Javier, just on that, one of the major concerns we've heard from a lot of business owners is that the cost of outdoor seating or shelter or heat is going to be too much to make it worth it. $5,000 doesn't go all that far.
Well, $5,000 is a very significant amount of money, and many of these businesses will share a space with businesses that are located nearby. So we're very confident that there'll be a significant amount of work can be done with that money. Of course, we're always open to listening to industry if there's particular precincts that require further money than that. The other announcements around bollards and improving public space, making sure we maintain safety as we make this important transition. We're not expecting venues to cover those costs. They'd be covered by us, and the Minister's spoken to some of the funding that will sit behind that. We think that there is an opportunity here to have many more patrons seated, drinking and dining, therefore turnover for those businesses. And we think these grants are targeted. They're exactly what's needed. And I think this won't just be a feature of this summer. I think it'll be there for the long term, which is a good thing. That sort of certainty is very important. I don't think very few businesses are going to invest large amounts of money, even with a grant, if next summer this wouldn't be an ongoing feature. I think that it will be, because I think patrons will warm to it.
When will venues be allowed to, particularly bigger pubs and restaurants, allowed to have some diners and drinkers inside with the density limit?
Sure, that's still being worked through. In fact, the exact density limit is still being worked through. 1 to 4 was what we did previously. A number of other states have moved to 1 to 2. And of course, we look at the experience they've had. We look at what risk that's posed, how it's worked for them. Today isn't the day for us to announce those things, but we will, by necessity, cover off on some of those matters when it comes to regional Victoria quite soon. And then obviously that'll at least in part inform where we land in metropolitan Melbourne.
Was there any evidence during, between lockdown 1 and 2, when the pubs and restaurants were open, that there was any actual infections from indoor dining?
Well, I think it's important, and we've made this point a number of different ways, but it's the same point. We're at often our greatest risk when we're over at a mate's place having dinner, because there's no time limit, there's no waiter that's making sure we keep our distance, there's not necessarily all the kind of infection control, cleaning tables, cleaning common areas, all of those things. I think our publicans, our cafes, restaurants and others have done a fantastic job, and I'm confident they will when we get to the point of opening up. They're not closed now because they are a high-risk setting. They're closed because it would only mean more virus if we allowed their customers, many hundreds of thousands, indeed millions of people, to freely move around metro Melbourne. That's the absolute key. So being open with no customers is not the answer here. Just like being open for a very short time and then being closed again is not the answer. We appreciate how challenging it is, but this is just one way in which I think we can get many more people seated, get turnover back into these businesses, and help them find that COVID normal, when I think outside will still be a bigger feature, but at that point it'll be safe to have larger numbers of people inside.
Javier, you've mentioned perspex screens a number of times when discussing outdoor dining. Will it be an expected feature of all outdoor dining to have perspex screens between units?
We'll have some more to say about the exact nature of how far apart people need to be, what maximum caps would be. So there will be a limit. It's not an unlimited thing. You can't have, hundreds and hundreds of people seated close together, because of course they have to get, even if they were distanced, they have to get to and from the place. All those sorts of issues. We'll have more to say quite soon about the exact rules. And there'll be, now that this announcement's been made, and there's been lots of discussions, and whilst I know many publicans, many restaurateurs would want everyone back inside, they'd like that to happen as soon as possible. It's not safe to do that. This is safe. This can be made safe, and therefore it is, I think, a really significant a really significant part of them opening up again. The exact details, we'll have more to say, and that'll be informed by talking to them as well about what's feasible, what's practical. Every venue is different. The adjoining public space, whether it be curbside car parking, footpath, the park that might be not far from that particular series of restaurants, for instance, all of that, indeed the actual roadway when it comes to some streets and laneways in the CBD, certainly, all of that will inform the treatment, if you like, that's given to each of those. But we'll have more to say about that soon.
Is it a thought that you might be able to have a more dense space if there is perspex, but a less dense space if there are no dividers like that?
I think you could probably draw that conclusion, yeah. I think that if you have got perspex screens, if you've got people distanced, you can probably get more people in there the more safety measures that you take. But that shouldn't be read to mean that if you've got perspex screens, you can have an unlimited number. There'll still be a cap because, again, it's about movement, it's about people congregating, getting in, getting out. There'll be some shared services, bathrooms and things like that. So we've just got to be careful that whilst we're taking the predominant activity outside, it's done in as safe a way as possible.
Speaking about door activities, Boxing Day Test and Australian Open.
Yes.
Are they going to have crowds this summer?
It's too early for us to be able to determine whether they'll have crowds. It's too early for us then also to determine how big any crowd might be. That's certainly our aim. We've taken that offline. We are having detailed discussions with whether it be cricket authorities, the MCC, the whole AO team, talking to them about what their event looks like. And there are lots of other events that are not quite as famous as that maybe, but there's lots of other events that would normally occur over summer, and we just have to work through each of those event by event, venue by venue, and so that isn't finished yet. And the other point is that it's really hard for us to predict where virus numbers will be. What risks do we have to deal with in just a few weeks' time, let alone months?
Are we on the right trajectory though?
I think we are, but I don't think it's going to be the Boxing Day Test like it normally is. Nor do I think the Australian Open will be exactly the same as it is. And don't read any more into that than, for instance, teams coming from overseas, players coming from overseas, coaches, officials, they're all going to have to quarantine. It's not going to be an ordinary summer from that point of view, but we'll get as many people as we can get there, provided it's safe. That's the most important thing. We don't want one event, as important as those events are economically and also for a sense of normality for people. The Australian Open tennis is a big feature of every summer. It's a really big event for us. But we don't want one event to necessarily set us back and cause us a problem.
Is there a risk we could lose those events?
I don't think so. I think we're in very productive discussions with both the Australian Open and also the Boxing Day Test, all the people involved there.
And would it be viable for them to go ahead, particularly the tennis, without crowds, for example?
Well, that wouldn't be their preferred outcome. Well, it's not my preferred outcome either. I think we just have to wait, and it's frustrating because we can't necessarily give you a definitive answer. But I'm not telling you any different to what Craig Tiley's been told or what people down at the G have been told. We will work through all these issues, and if we could give people a definitive answer today, then we would. But same applies for Melbourne Club, Cox Plate, all manner of spring racing, if you like. There's a whole range of different events. The good thing about the two that Rich mentioned is they're a bit further away. They're well into the summer, and they're well, hopefully, into that COVID normal that we've all found and that we can lock in. But it's just too early for us to say now.
Does that mean giving up the Boxing Day Test and maybe having the Melbourne Test later in the summer?
No, I don't think so. We're in very productive discussions with the cricket people about that. We want the event here. It's where it's best played. We just have to work out what a safe crowd would be, and it's just too hard for us to say now what that number is and what the nature of that would be. There'll come a time when we'll be able to have more to say about that.
Is the Boxing Day Test the same as the AFL Grand Final? And Victoria has a kind of contract with it, or?
I'm going to let the Minister for the Boxing Day Test tell you about that.
We have an agreement with Cricket Australia. The MCG has an agreement with Cricket Australia for it to be played at the MCG this year. We are working with Cricket Australia on a longer-term deal. The constraint is Cricket Australia's arrangements with the International Cricket Council about how long they have an agreement for the Boxing Day test to be in Australia for. So at the moment there's an agreement, as I recall, for the Boxing Day test to be an Australian event until 2022, and CA are in discussions with the ICC and the BCCI about extending that arrangement, but that's an ongoing conversation. I think you might be aware that our friends in South Africa have been coveting that time slot for a while now.
With the outdoor dining, will there be easy changes to liquor licensing rules about outdoor service of alcohol?
That's our objective, yes.
Is that going to be, will that be on the sort of each venue, or there'll be sort of blanket changes to outdoor drinking rules per council?
Well, they're conversations that we'll have with both local government and the VCGLR, but as the Premier indicated, we are keen to expedite those conversations. We're not, it's not about having, a move towards outdoor dining in the summer and then having that all caught up in bureaucracy and red tape. We'll be looking to move as many of those obstacles out of the way as we can as quickly as possible.
Who will be in charge of enforcement for those density limits and some of those alcohol limits? Will it be councils or...?
Oh, well, look, I think that's still to be determined, but, when you're talking about licensed venues, the VCGLR has a role to play, local government has a role to play, but as we get those rules in place, we'll make all of that clear.
Can I just ask, Brett, just with the testing numbers, does there need to be a benchmark minimum tests to meet a benchmark, particularly for Metro Melbourne, in terms of, it might be 5 cases an average, but do you need a certain amount of tests to make sure that's a real number?
There are some WHO guidelines for numbers of tests that should be done for every case detected, and we're meeting those for all of our local government areas across Victoria, but we want to do better than that. So we're not setting benchmarks per se, but we are doing a kind of traffic light system where we know that there's higher case numbers or more transmission. We want the testing to reflect those hotspot areas in particular. But it's absolutely the case that all of those postcodes, LGAs with 0 cases, and maybe 0 cases for weeks and weeks, need to have a baseline level of testing that should be maintained. So we haven't got a fixed number, but we're certainly looking at that comparison of how much testing is being done against how many cases, how many active cases, how much transmission's occurring. And
you're comfortable with where it's at the moment?
Oh, today is not a day that is ideally meeting the kind of testing numbers in terms of the 24-hour period reported beforehand. So really like to continue to push that. We've got 9 of today's cases that have come from Hallam Narrawarren area. So I'd say Casey local government area. Today's your day to think about, have I got symptoms? Have I had symptoms recently? Have I been tested? And absolutely get out there and get tested, because that risk will change over time and it will change geographically, but we certainly want to push it each and every day.
Are you worried about a cohort of people who don't want to get tested because they're worried if they test positive, not the actual effects of the virus, but the fact is that it might keep lockdown longer? Are you worried about that?
Well, the issue about lockdown is the pathway out is testing. So, I really want to emphasise for people, outbreaks will occur if you're not testing, and they'll be detected. They'll be detected as people turn up to hospital. They'll be detected as some of the most vulnerable become manifestly unwell. So testing is our pathway out of this, and testing is the way to make sure that any restrictions that are in place are in place for the shortest possible time. So testing should be seen as the way out more than anything.
As we open up, will we see more of that sort of rapid testing, the sort of one that turns out around in a few hours?
Yeah, we're absolutely looking at point-of-care testing or near real-time testing where you can turn around a result in 20 or 30 minutes. I think that makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference both in terms of managing that person clinically. If they're positive, to isolate them, how their care needs to be managed, but also in terms of that contact tracing. You take off 12 hours between couriering swabs to a path lab, the turnaround time for them to process those swabs and then getting the results in. If we can have a point of care test that's done, an iPad, a smart form notifying the department all within 30 minutes, that takes hours and hours off our contact tracing time period. So I think it's there are a bunch of innovations, the spit test, the saliva test, but also the rapid blood point of care tests that can turn up the antigen and others that we're exploring.
Are you a particular Is there a particular cohort or demographic that rapid testing would be kind of targeted at? Or
I think we just look at the fact that people will come to different testing sites with different motivations and different opportunities, and if you're capturing some people who otherwise haven't come forward for testing, maybe because they didn't want to take a day or 2 days to wait for that result, maybe because they're the kind of people who want that instant result back to them so they know exactly what they can tell their family or their household and go about their lives. If they're people who aren't testing now and a rapid test means that they step up for it, fantastic. But also anyone who's presenting to an emergency department, you don't want to have to go through a long process of testing there. If you can turn around a test quickly, the same in general practice, if you can turn around a test quickly and give someone that reassurance, that's a fantastic thing.
Our average is around 54.4 at the moment. Where are you expecting that to be at the end of this week?
Look, it'll drop below 50 by the end of this week, I'm sure. If you look at the 14-day period before today, it's been in the 150, 170 kind of mark. But I've seen the unknown acquisition cases, the 14-day total, continually drop over recent weeks. And in the last few days, it's 4 or 5 per day. So again, if you look forward for the next 2 weeks, it should be in the 50, 60, 70 mark, which is obviously a positive trend. We don't report each and every day the mystery cases because they take 2 or 3 days to resolve. But that 14-day total, that rolling 14-day total, is something that should be tweeted today. I know I promised yesterday that Vic DHHS Twitter handle will be reporting that 14-day total for regional Victoria, which is less relevant. It's almost moot. They're going to get there tomorrow, all things being equal. But for Metro Melbourne, it'll be useful to watch that number ongoing.
And so is that September 28 date? You said previously it was set in stone. Is that still the case?
Yes. We need that time for the kind of settings that we have. But, I'm very confident we'll be in that 30 to 50 range for average daily cases. But if it's in the 20 to 30 range, all the better, but we need that time for the policy settings to be in place.
Have you got any data on how many patients went to hospital, didn't have COVID and contracted it there?
I haven't seen it. It is able to be captured. VicNIS, our Victorian nosocomial infection surveillance system, has recorded patients' status in terms of coronavirus on admission to hospital, so we can interrogate all of that data and get an answer for you.
And is it safe for Parliament to sit this week, given there is a confirmed case in the security guard there?
We think so. So obviously the outbreak squad's been out. They're very happy. The case and contact management and outbreak management team have reviewed the situation in terms of close contacts. They're very happy about the risk being absolutely contained. All of those close contacts are being furloughed. And so I think it's pretty straightforward to open, but we would review that over the coming 24 hours.
Why is regional Victoria taking any longer to get to the third step if they're already below 5?
So they need that 14-day period with no cases of unknown acquisition, no mystery cases. At the moment, that 14-day period includes 3 mystery cases, but they will drop off as that 14-day period moves into tomorrow.
And just with the day one of bubble buddies for people living on their own, what's the rules, just to clarify the rules on masks for people meeting in their own homes, just one-on-one?
Yeah, look, my policy team recommended masks to be mandatory. Cabinet accepted that. I accept that. So that'll be the requirement.
You said before with the September 28 date that's necessary with the settings we have now. Can you just kind of explain what that means? And is part of the logic on that kind of, considering we've got these tough restrictions in, just keep them in and try and quash it as much as we can?
Yeah, there's certainly, as the Premier talks to the issues internationally, and of course it's not entirely comparable. 500 million people in a continent with free movement between 35 countries is a different kettle of fish. But in Australia, with really restricted international travel, we do have this opportunity to get down to such low numbers that they are sustainable for months and months and months. They are not opportunities that will be easily available to Europe without constraints being in place for the forward period. I know that the UK's gone to meeting maximum 6 people outside. That will probably be in place well into next year. Israel's going through a lockdown. They've talked about 3 weeks, but they will have, again, I don't want to commentate on the appropriateness of their response, but they will have high numbers beyond that because they haven't got that opportunity to get to extremely low numbers. The same challenge in France and Spain that really rely on international tourism and travel to maintain their economies. We've got an opportunity to get down to extremely low levels, and now is the time to keep those constraints in place for the freedoms that we get, not just saving lives, which is obviously our key objective here, and avoiding hospitalisation and all of the consequences that we know that coronavirus has, and some are yet to be fully understood, but multi-system illness affecting kidneys and lungs and the nervous system and the heart, including of healthy people. You know, recent evidence of athletes who are getting MRIs that show that they get inflammation of their heart that might be a long-term disability or a long-term effect on their cardiovascular performance. For all of those reasons, we want numbers low. But there is absolutely a view that the hard bit now is really significant opening up and greater freedoms in the long term, which will not be available to Europe or North America in the same way, because they will have the challenge of hundreds to thousands of cases that they don't want to get out of control.
We'll be looking at quick steps after September 28th then, if you know, we are able to really push the numbers right down and get towards those targets.
We will follow it every day, every week. So, you know, those assessments will be made at each point in time. But, you know, from what we have tried to model and what we have understood from how things have gone elsewhere and internationally, we need to get to the kind of indicative levels that have been laid out. But we'll look, as I've said, we'll look at what those cases are, where they're occurring, why they're occurring, and how we can be really surgical, if we can, about the interventions that are required. And if they're particularly focused geographically, or they're particularly focused on a setting or a cohort of people, that means that we can make some other changes for other settings, we'll do that. But they're the kind of indicative dates that I think will apply.
Can I ask about Hallam and Narre Warren? That Casey area has been a sticking point throughout this. Now that the cases are lower, have you been able to work out what's happening out there, why it's...
There's certainly some community transmission. We haven't linked all of the households definitively, but they might be linked by a workplace that hasn't been identified. They might be linked by going to a single setting that hasn't been identified. So it is a call out to everyone in that local government area, and those suburbs in particular, to come forward for testing, because there will be other cases out there that we need to identify, and testing, as I say, is the opportunity to snuff this out. And in 2 weeks' time, you know, I'll be standing up here saying Hallam has 0, new cases, or KCLGA, has totally turned the corner.
Is there a demographic or community trend in those cases out in the south?
Yeah, there is. These are multicultural community members. It's not different to how it's been for our second wave in large part. And again, this is linked to the high-risk workplaces in lots of ways. So it's a community that are a priority for engagement. They're a priority for testing for us. They do the right thing, but they have some vulnerabilities in terms of where they're needing to work and how they're needing to work.
Is that engagement not getting through?
No, I think it's getting through very well. I've made an offer to personally speak to that community, having been to Afghanistan a couple of times over the years. I want to be able to, reflect on my cultural experiences and the fact that I know that, there are universal motivations that every family has to do the right thing to protect their own families and the wider community. That's absolutely the case here. I know they're motivated to get on top of this as much as anyone.
Are you worried that rules are being ignored out there?
No, I don't think so. I think there are genuinely, structural issues about workforce that make transmission more likely.
Do you know how public transport's going to work as we open up? Will there be additional measures we have to put in place on top of what we're doing already?
Yeah, a lot of it's been talked through already. It was talked through in the first wave. We'll revisit that as return to public transport happens, but we know that there'll be a longer term kind of policy objective to have people who can work from home continue to work from home. So I don't think the pressures on public transport will be what they have been historically in normal times. But we'll revisit them in terms of the cleaning and the signage and the awareness raising that public transport passengers will need to have, and some of the other scheduling arrangements that might be pertinent there.
There's been some restrictions that are eased today, playgrounds opening, you get an extra hour to exercise. Based on the first wave or based on the evidence you have now, is there a risk that people kind of get a bit excited and take it too far? And if so, how do you mitigate that risk?
They're baby steps. You know, we all recognise that it's not an absolute sea change in terms of what's opening up. But I think that's what we're trying to manage here. We're managing expectations. We're being really clear that outdoor activities are the lower risk activities, and that these small steps are the ones that will continue to keep us safe and keep us on a steady pathway. I know how keen everyone is to get to a different place, but you only need small numbers. I don't want anyone looking at the daily numbers by postcode and saying, oh, there are no cases in my postcode, you know, what's the issue here? I'm sure someone in Wuhan in January said, you know, we've only got 100 cases. Why is this city being locked down? We can't have short-term memories on this. It starts with small numbers, it explodes, and then the place that was not infected, becomes a place that's absolutely overrun with cases. So we have to consider Victoria as a whole, and we have to all do the right thing, no matter what it looks like locally for us.
Question for either the Premier or the Minister. Why have you limited the grants for sole traders to people who have like a tenant or a licensee, rather than people who might be at home or their business is based on the road?
Well, Rich, there's a couple of reasons. One is where this is being targeted at those sole traders which have the greatest restrictions and indeed the greatest overheads. And I'd make the point that there are north of 400,000 sole traders in Victoria. They have been primarily supported by the Commonwealth. We're happy to make support available to as large a cohort as we can reasonably and responsibly do. And you'll see that at 33,000 sole traders, that's $100 million. You don't need to extrapolate much to work out what 400,000 would cost to the budget. So we are working within a constrained envelope, and we've decided to target it at those most affected by restrictions, those with the greatest overheads. I understand that not every sole trader, like the ones that are working from home, or those that are reopening on the 28th of September, will be necessarily pleased by that, but we think it's as appropriately targeted as it can be.
I'm not sure if he's best placed to answer this question, but a question on behalf of the beauty industry. With regards to the announcement they'll be moving in line with hairdressers, it's been said that face tattoos won't be allowed because masks can't be worn. But it has been asked, what about things such as brow tattoos, which could be done with a mask on? Whoever would like to take that.
This will join the list of subject matter that I've become relatively expert in with no reasonable expectation pre-pandemic that I would. If you can wear a mask while the procedure's being done for the duration of the procedure, then you can have that procedure. Obviously, there are some procedures where that would not be possible, and therefore, given the risk, that aerosol risk, it's not appropriate that part of those businesses, those particular products that you might purchase, those services, they will not be allowed to have it.
Just on regional Victoria, Professor Sutton was saying just then that tomorrow marks when those mystery cases would go. Is there a particular day that you're looking at taking that next step for regional Victorians? Is it going to be?
We'll be here tomorrow, and hopefully we've had no mystery cases in the data I report tomorrow, and hopefully we can have more to say. But I think it is important, and look, I no doubt there'll be some criticism that, we haven't been given any notice. Well, this is the nature of these things. There will be, because you've got to hit the target before you can make the decision. There won't be a lot of notice, but I think that's preferable than making people wait for another week or so. So hopefully we can have some very, very good news for regional Victoria tomorrow, but that is subject to the numbers that come in today. The key point here is that that is the best demonstration, because it's live, it's real, it's actually happening. It's not a theoretical exercise, it's not a model, it's actually occurring. Got the numbers low, kept the numbers low, and now we can open up. That should be a great boost for everybody, not just in regional Victoria, but in metropolitan Melbourne, looking and thinking, can we achieve this? Absolutely we can. and we will. The frustrating part about this is that, back to Rich's question, I think we will hit the 30 to 50 number, and we might even get there ahead of time. But you only know what you know with this virus. And the latent element of it, the fact that what I do today, I won't see the impact for at least 10 days, maybe 14 days, that's where the passage of time, as painful as it is, it becomes your friend in terms of having certainty about what's happening out there. Because not every symptomatic person gets tested. Not every case, despite the work of our coronavirus detectives, even though we're meeting and exceeding national benchmarks, not every case can be tracked back to its source. There are those mysteries. And whenever there's a mystery case, there's at least one other person who gave it to them. And on average, that person will have 2 or 3 close contacts. So I think you get the point. There'll be things out there that we don't know about. And that's why it's not just numbers, as they're the things you do know. It's also about the passage of time to make sure that there's not something that you're missing, and that when you make a judgment off data that can never be a complete data set, because not everyone gets tested, the passage of time helps you to get a better sense that that's an accurate reflection.
I know you were talking at the end of last week about a case in Echuca that you weren't sure about where
it was a false positive. I was very pleased to learn only a short time after I stood down from the podium. Not hours, but it was very, very good news.
Another $290 million today in assistance. How is Victoria going to pay for all of this?
Well, as the Reserve Bank Governor has indicated to us, as Stephen Kennedy, the head of the Federal Treasury, has indicated to us, that now's the time to invest. And you've got to use the strength of our budget. And I had this conversation with the PM at some length recently, where it was acknowledged that our budget was in a very strong position coming into this. You've got to use every lever that you've got access to. So now's the time to borrow, now's the time to invest, because of course, if you don't get growth in the economy again, if you don't get that economic recovery, which can only happen after you've dealt with the health issue, then there's no prospect of paying that money back, there's no prospect of getting back to something like a normal budget, where you've got revenues at pretty much, normal levels, you've got growth in the economy, employment opportunities, profits, all of those things. So now's the time to use the state budget to protect household budgets. Now's the time to use the state budget and our balance sheet and the fact that borrowing costs, carrying costs of capital are lower than they have perhaps ever been. Just as the Governor tells us, just as the Federal Treasury tells us, just as I think, not to put words in his mouth, but I think the Prime Minister's been pretty clear that he wants states to do their share of the heavy lifting, and that's exactly what we're doing. Now, how that all tallies up, that'll all be brought to book and brought to account when the budget's delivered.
How does that sort of fit in? The state's going to have to do the heavy lifting when the Prime Minister said...
Our share of the heavy lifting.
Have you spoken to him about more specific support for Victoria?
Well, he issued a statement yesterday, and then they've made a decision that there won't be a change to the JobKeeper or JobSeeker arrangements. That's entirely a matter for them. I've raised a separate issue with him, and that is the tax status of all of these hardship payments. I think it's wrong for hardship payments to be the subject of tax at a Commonwealth level. We've certainly made, and I got a very good hearing, can I say, and I think the Prime Minister with his Budget Committee colleagues, they'll look at that issue, and of course that wouldn't just apply in Victoria, that would apply across the board. And it wouldn't just be these round of payments we announced yesterday, but other payments that have been made throughout the whole global pandemic. We've made arrangements to not take, we've altered arrangements around payroll tax for JobKeeper, work cover premiums for JobKeeper. We think this is the kind of other side of that coin, and if that can be even of small benefit to businesses, then every bit helps. The federal government have got a budget coming up, and I'm confident that that'll have a whole range of measures, whether it be projects or many other things that they might do. They understand the reality that we all face, not just in Melbourne and Victoria, but indeed right across the country.
Melburnians with a second property, either in country Victoria or by the coast in bushfire areas, will they be able to go and do some bushfire preparedness maintenance ahead of the summer season? They
will, but it'll be closely aligned to what we normally do, Bushfire Action Week, so that preparedness is not for some weeks normally, and we'll try and keep that as close to the normal timing as possible, and that does fit it fits better into our restriction and our roadmap than if they were to go and do that work now. The other point too is that the forward outlook, the Bureau tell us that there are substantial spring rains that are forecast, and in fact the risk of flooding in some places. So going and doing a heap of mowing now, only to then have very significant rain events, might not necessarily be the best thing to do. You'd have to go back and do it again. As soon as we're in a position to update people, we will, but that's still some way off. That's not till October normally. And we'll have a fire season launch as we do every year. But I just, in a similar forum to this, but with regional media last week, I did make the point that everyone in regional Victoria can rest assured that a big team of people are doing all the normal work to be ready for what we always assume, planning for the worst, that it'll be another long, hot, dry and dangerous summer. So ordering the retardant, ordering the choppers and the fixed-wing aircraft, all of those things, that continues apace.
You mentioned that there was going to be added security or beefed up hard line between Metro and Regional. What does it actually look like? Are there extra resources or more police?
I'll have more to say about that very soon. We need to make sure that only people who have got a lawful reason to go into regional Victoria, and indeed an urgent reason to come from regional Victoria into Metro Melbourne, are doing that. Because, of course, if we have too many people doing that don't really need to, then there's every risk that you transport the virus from metropolitan Melbourne into regional communities where there is little or no virus. We don't want that. I think all regional Victorians are very proud of the job they've done. I'm proud of them. I'm very grateful to them. And they jealously guard their low numbers and they want to keep them low. So today's not the day for that, but we will have more to say about enforcement, about penalties, about making sure that those checkpoints are as effective as possible.
Just to clarify with regional Victoria that you may put Colac, Geelong, the Geelong corridor, if you like, leave them in a separate stage to the rest of the regional Victoria.
So what we did a week ago was we said that at that stage, and if trends had continued, it was possible that numbers were high in that corridor and that could stall the rest of regional Victoria taking 1 and 2 steps. Pleasingly, we've got those numbers right down, and at this stage they do not pose, as you can see from having an average of 3.9, those case numbers don't hold up the rest of regional Victoria going to that next stage. The other point to make here is that the public health response, particularly with the Colac outbreak, to pull that up as quickly as we did, the public health response in the Latrobe Valley, a little bit earlier, but roughly in this time period, to be able to, we had that person who travelled down there and visited many different places. We were able to get on top of that really quickly too. So that should be a comfort to people as well.
Premier, for businesses who have seen yesterday's announcement, have seen today's announcement, and still think it doesn't go far enough to keep them afloat, can they be expecting any more relief to be announced in coming weeks?
Well, look, I understand that whenever you announce a package of assistance, regardless of how many zeros are behind each grant, there'll be people who don't think that's enough. That's perfectly healthy. We consulted with business consultation, and getting exactly the answer you want is not the same thing. But we've listened and we've, I think, struck the right balance. We have a budget later in the year. It will be replete with massive investments that will drive demand and confidence, get people out there spending again. Having people in work is the greatest thing you can do for any Victorian business, regardless of where they are or what sector they're in. If there's more money moving around the economy because people have got a sense of confidence and their household income is as certain as it can be and as high as it can be because they're in work, that's where you really see that the engine that is the economy really firing forward and seeing both revenue into cash registers in businesses, revenue via wages into households, and indeed revenue into the government so we can keep investing and keep underpinning demand. That's when you've got all the pistons firing and you've got a situation where you can be really confident that 2021 is going to be a very different year to 2020. Key point though, none of that's possible until you get the health problem fixed. None of that is possible until you get the health problem fixed, and that's why we're focused there. And if you could flip it, if you could do economic repair before you got the pandemic under control, well then we would do that. But that's not the nature of this virus.
Can I ask you about elective surgery?
Yes.
And when we'll hear announcements about that's a source of real worry for some people?
Yes, we will. I know it is a cause of concern. No one is more displeased than me to have to cancel surgery. We have prided ourselves for a long time, for a long time, with doing more surgery, making sure people get the most timely care possible. But for safety's sake and to create capacity within the health system for people who needed the bed, and again, anyone on a surgery waiting list, anyone in Victoria, we're all invested in this key principle. The sickest always get treated quickest. And you can't do it any other way. And any of us could, at a moment's notice, could finish up in a situation where we are the sickest or a loved one is the sickest. So that principle is a really important one. But we had to create capacity. We've also there's some pressure there when you've got as many COVID patients as we had, as many staff that are ill, as many that are furloughed. But that's settling now. Those numbers are much better, and we'll have some more to say quite soon about the numbers of elective surgeries that can start happening again, regional, metro, as well as some more to say, probably a little bit after then, but quite soon. We'll have more to say about some of the blitz activity we'll do to catch up on the surgeries that we just haven't been able to do.
Is that in the coming weeks? Are we talking
Yeah.
about the next couple of weeks?
Do you know how many people are currently on the wait list for elective surgery?
I'd need to come back to you with an exact number, but I'm happy to try and get it for you. It'll obviously be higher than it's probably ever been because we've had to literally stop a whole range of surgeries. There's nothing going on in Category 3. That's a substantial amount of the work that we do in any given day, and only a fraction of Category 2 have been going ahead the most urgent. So it'll be a substantial number.
Suggestion it might be around about 130,000. Does that sound ballpark figure?
Oh, look, I could speculate. I could search for the figure in my head. From memory, from an historical point of view, best thing to do is get you the actual number, and I will, as best we can.
On Police Premier, there are a couple of incidents that got some publicity over the weekend. The woman that seemed to be pulled from her car, man that seemed to be kicked in the head. What do you make of those? And are you worried that incidents like that, I know police are going to look into at least one of them.
Yeah.
Are you worried incidents like that might affect public trust in police at such an important time?
Well, what I'd say is that, as you point out, Michael, Victoria Police will look at least one of those incidents, and I wouldn't want to cut across that. I'm not sure, in relation to the first example you used, I'm not sure what, if any, further action will be taken against that person. So again, I don't want to cut across that either. But I think I'm safe to make the following comment. Much of this, all of it can be avoided if people don't protest. That's the first thing. Because protesting is not only selfish, but it's stupid.
The woman was just in her
No, hang on. I'm coming to that. That's everyone. Everyone, right? All of it can be avoided. Anything relating to a protest, if the protest doesn't happen. That just logic tells you that. The second point in relation to your first example and the woman in the car, well, if on any of the 4 occasions she was invited to provide her name, she had done that, well, then it wouldn't have escalated to that point. It simply wouldn't have. I gave the example yesterday when my vehicle was pulled over as part of routine checkpoint coming into a briefing like this just a couple of days ago. We stopped. We said hello to the officer. The officer said hello to us. I didn't need to produce my driver's licence or any ID. He worked out who I was. We had a brief chat, and I moved on. If I had been asked to produce identification or my permit or any of that, I would have cooperated. And then there's no need for anybody to be dragged from a vehicle. And the other point to make here is you don't, at law, if you're asked to produce your driver's licence or to confirm your identity, then you must do that. That's not optional. You must do that. No matter what stuff you've read on the web about your, some international covenant or whatever nonsense that you've seen on the web, if the police ask you who you are, where do you live, what are you doing, then we've got a state of disaster on here. People are dying. These are pretty high stakes. And no one gets to make the choice that their rights as they interpret them are more important than public safety. They aren't. Let's all get to the other side of this. And one of the ways we'll do that is not wasting police time and not being out there protesting.
That second video, though, that people get quite scared when they see stuff like that. What can you say to...
Again, I'm not. That's a matter that I think police have indicated they're looking at that matter, and I wouldn't want to cut across that. That's appropriate for them to do that. They may be able to give you a more detailed answer than that, but I'm not briefed on the specifics of that matter.
Okay, just a question from Canberra. How do you feel knowing that your name was on that list of 2.4 million names that was leaked by the Chinese government or their information gathering? That doesn't bother you at all?
I'm sure there are many people in public life that are on different lists. I haven't given it a great deal of thought. If people in Canberra have got time to be giving that great deal of thought, well then I'm very pleased for them, but I don't. I don't.
Could I ask Professor Sutton?
You certainly can.
We heard last week, Brett, about the government wants to set up these local contact tracing hubs. Do you have any updates on when that might actually happen, where there'll be any more details on them?
It's certainly being explored now. So we are looking at how to establish a steering committee and some appropriate governance. It's not something we should rush into. I'm absolutely an advocate for those who are locally engaged with their communities being a really central part of how we go about providing the support to clinical care for people who are being looked after at home, as well as all of the other needs that they might have as they isolate or quarantine, but also the role, especially of primary care, especially of GPs, in contact tracing and in the clinical support of people. There are obviously community health centres and hospitals that can play a role there as well for some of the more difficult clinical decision making and for some of the more nuanced contact tracing. It's not a matter to rush. We're in a place now where our contact tracing is as slick as it's ever been, and the transition needs to be sustainable. It needs to be well planned and well thought through, but it's already underway. And so that engagement with primary healthcare networks and the hospitals and primary care is underway, but we need to do it in an appropriately stepwise manner.
GPs have said as well that kind of frustrated with delays. People that they know, they've kind of done a bit of contact tracing themselves. What do you think of that kind of decentralising it and them taking the responsibility?
Yeah, I think to the extent that they can be empowered to follow up those patients that they know very well, those patients and their families and their circumstances, that's a strength. But part of the challenge has been people have been tested without nominating a GP. People have been tested and only their phone number has been captured. We're certainly moving to make sure that to the fullest extent that we can, we're capturing the GP name and details at the point of testing. And for people who don't have a GP, that we make sure that we can make those connections and get that liaison happening at the earliest possible time.
I don't know whether it'd be one for you or one for the Premier, but after the delegation that went to New South Wales, what are kind of the key practical points you've got out of that, and what's the next step in potentially making changes?
I haven't seen the detailed report. It's still being drafted. I think the bottom line is there are bits and pieces on both sides from both jurisdictions in terms of what can be reflected upon. There were some gaps that New South Wales knew that they had that we share. We're both working on them. There were some things that we should both reflect on and try and improve. They're kind of at the margins where we're doing things in a not dissimilar way, but there'll be more to improve by virtue of that deeper exchange, and we're very grateful to New South Wales for having hosted, because they did a terrific job.
Very good.
Thank you.
That's all. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks very much.